Mary Esther here, Tiffany's here, and we have Scott Munro to talk with us today. Scott is a graduate from UT Computer Science, and he's working at Xbox right now. So Scott, thank you for joining us today and giving us some words of wisdom and guidance for some of these students or potential students for computer science. We're giving them a broad overview of what you can do with a computer science degree. And so if you could tell us about what you're doing now in your job and what your role is, that would be a great start.
Yeah, of course. Super happy to be here, by the way. So right now, my job is primarily writing software so that the folks who make video games, game developers, can make multiplayer networked video games. So if you're playing Call of Duty or Halo or Fortnite or whatever, those types of multiplayer online experiences are the kinds of things that the software that I develop helps facilitate. More specifically, the stuff we work on is really pivotal in like making it so you can talk to your friends while you're playing.
What are the requirements on your computer to do multiplayer games?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly like a huge space, and you know, it's kind of funny. It's like I almost feel like I'm learning a lot of this stuff as I go, essentially. So I'll try and speak to it to the best of my ability. But you know, when it comes to kind of setting up these multiplayer games, it's from the kind of networking perspective, what that whole connection process looks like is, you know, your computer kind of has this addressable location that other computers can use to talk with it. And this is kind of like a broader, like larger internet thing. But in the same way that your computer can kind of talk to your web browser, which can then talk to google.com and get back information. So your computer can also talk to other computers and communicate information about your video game. And so game developers use this so that they can kind of keep two people playing the same game kind of in line with each other and in sync. And then, so even though I'm playing a copy of my game on my local console, my Xbox, and you're playing a copy of your game on your Xbox, we can kind of play them together in relative sync. And the chat side of that kind of follows the same thing, where it's, you know, just communicating audio data. So, you know, you're speaking into a microphone, the microphone is capturing that audio data. We do some magic under the covers to then send that off to everybody that you're playing with, and then they can hear that data come back.
What language are you using to program?
Yeah, so we primarily use C++. That is, I don't, that we primarily use C++. I would say that that's kind of a large cultural trend within the game development space, kind of at large. A lot of games are written in C++, and I think that comes from kind of it's a historical thing. And there's also the angle to it that the team that I work on specifically also has a lot of, it wears a lot of hats. And one of the hats that we wear is writing kind of the operating system level code that goes on with the Xbox as well, which a lot of that stuff is also historically written in C++. And so we've got a lot of kind of roots in C++, and that's where we kind of lean.
Is that a proprietary operating system, or are you using an existing OS?
It's proprietary.
Okay. I was just curious, because we have been talking about operating systems some in the class at UT. Did you take Allison Norman's class?
I did indeed. It was one of my favorite classes, actually.
Oh, very good. We just talked to Allison yesterday and learned more about her OS class, which is why I wanted to kind of ask you about, you know, proprietary versus open systems and such.
Actually, if you'll let me speak to that, despite me saying that it's a proprietary system, it's still really cool kind of reflecting and knowing that a lot of the concepts that we did touch on in that class still apply in kind of a more abstract sense to the stuff we're working on in our own operating system. So a lot of the concepts still translate reasonably well. A lot of the things that you'll learn in the operating systems class around, you know, user space programs and multi-threading and all that stuff I use pretty much every day at work.
Sure, and I imagine a lot of operating systems are like that because they all derived from somewhere in the first place, and then we had all these variants of different operating systems. So
yeah, exactly.
anything you're exposed to, you're going to find those similarities somewhere along the line, as you mentioned. What's a day like when you, do you typically go to the office, or are you working at home now because you have to. What was it like before we had COVID-19 in our lives?
Yeah, so before I would definitely go to the office every day. Um, some people kind of do the work from home thing, but I think especially on the Xbox team, there's a larger culture of being in office, and it kind of stems from originally like there's often a need to be working directly with hardware that's more difficult to kind of get like the legal clearance to take home, um, and so it's just easier to work in the office. Now with the COVID stuff, we're all working from home and working remotely, and we've had to adapt in interesting ways to this kind of remote work. Um, but typically, a lot of us do and prefer to kind of work in the office, and we also just kind of like the in-person camaraderie, the hallway conversations, the ability to easily pop into your coworker's office and ask what's going on. I know there's a lot of kind of within like the tech space, there's a lot of companies that like to kind of enforce like open office plans and stuff like that, for similar reasons of wanting to like facilitate open conversation. And we don't quite do that. Everyone still has their own office, but there's a very like collaborative and open kind of communication culture where it's really easy to pop into somebody else's office and talk about something or write something up really quick on the whiteboard or whatever. So definitely would go into the office every day. Um, and it's actually pretty cool. One of the things that I really like about Microsoft, specifically, like one of my hands down favorite things, is that they have their own kind of company shuttle set up. So I don't actually have to drive into work any day. Like they have a bus that comes right around, and it's like a 3-minute walk from my house, so I can really easily get to work and back, without having to like sit in a 2-hour commute, which I know some people do when they have to commute to
Yeah,
like downtown Seattle, which is absurd.
yeah, no kidding. So you're at the Microsoft campus?
Yeah.
Okay. Explain to us your work structure.
Of course, of course. So Xbox is Microsoft's like gaming platform, their gaming console and their whole gaming brand. Um, so we are part of the Microsoft company structure, but we're like one of the large pillars of it. So within Microsoft, there's like the kind of large pillar based around like productivity office software, so Word and PowerPoint and all that stuff. And there's a whole host of like enterprise software, so all the stuff that you see with like the Azure cloud stuff. And then there's kind of Xbox, and Xbox is where myself and a whole bunch of other people work on all sorts of products related to Xbox or related to gaming. There is, I think that's right. Nowadays, I think our org is called like gaming specifically and not just Xbox. Um, but there are other things like there's a service that we run that's kind of like a competitive service for the Twitch streaming platform. Ours is called Mixer. So they're also kind of under that same org umbrella. Um, so yeah, even though I typically say that I work at Xbox as opposed to say I work at Microsoft, because Xbox is, to me, it's like the dream, and it's a little more glamorous
Sure.
than Microsoft, but it's still kind of the same. We're not like exactly the same as every other part of Microsoft, but I feel like we're similar.
Scott, can you tell us about the interview process and what it was like to get a job at Xbox?
Yeah, for sure. So the interviews all kind of kicked off through my involvement with like the CS Career Fair. The UT Computer Science School has a really huge, sorry, I said CS Career Fair. It's the College of Natural Sciences Career Fair, which CS is under the College of Natural Sciences. Um, and it's this really big event that they host, and a whole bunch of big companies like Microsoft and Google and Amazon and all the huge ones all show up so that students can talk with them about getting involved with internships. Um, and so my sophomore year, I went to, no, that's wrong. It was my junior year. My junior year, I went to the career fair and talked with a Microsoft recruiter. And we kind of hit it off, and, um, you know, I gave her my resume, and, she sent me an email saying, hey, this is so great to meet you or whatever. And then I had the good fortune of running into her later at one of the recruiting events that was going on around campus at the time. Because after the career fair, there's often, Microsoft will hold an event where it's like, hey, come learn about Microsoft specifically, or hey, come learn about Google or whatever. So I I ran into her there again, and we talked again. I said, hey, I gave you my resume before. I just wanted to sync up again and see what's up. And from there, that kind of led to our first kind of phone interview. And the phone interview was like a pretty straightforward behavioral one. A lot of questions about like what got me involved into computer science, what things really excite me in computer science, what those general kinds of like aspirational questions, things that kind of slot more into company culture than they do into like technical details. And that went along well enough. And so from there, they scheduled an in-person interview, and that was they flew me out up to Seattle, up to Redmond, so that I could do an in-person interview up there. And how Microsoft does that is like every fall, kind of closer to winter, but in the fall, they just start hosting these large, huge sessions where like 40, 50 people come up at a time and rotate through the whole interview process. And so I got to do that, and it was a really interesting experience. Having to fly somewhere for an interview is pretty crazy. So I flew up there, and the interview itself was, for me, it was intense. I think it's intense. I don't know if it's intense compared to like what's typically expected of these kinds of software engineer positions these days, but it was 3 or 4 hours of pretty much back-to-back, interviews where I'd be sitting out with this pool of other potential applicants, and then someone would come in and pull me aside, and we'd go into our little room and we'd have a technical conversation about something. We'd either solve a technical problem on a whiteboard, or talk about something with code, or maybe a more abstract academic-y kind of problem. I was actually asked about the kinds of things that we learned about in the operating systems class, so that was another example where that was really helpful for me to have taken that one. And so I went, back to back 4 interviews, and I suppose they liked me because they asked me to then at that point join on as an intern for that summer. So then so that summer I went up and I was an intern for one of the Xbox Live teams. And Xbox Live is like it's kind of like the live services platform that Xbox runs on. So when you have like your friends in Xbox Live is powered, when your friends on Xbox is powered by Xbox Live. And when you hook up with your friends to play games, that's all happening through Xbox Live. So I interned with one of the teams on Xbox Live, and had a great summer. It was a really interesting, exciting experience. And then at the end of the internship, I was talking with my manager, and he said, I really like the work you did this summer. That was great. We'd love to have you come back for full-time. So at that point, I transitioned from internship to full-time. And it was actually kind of interesting because the team that I got the offer with and that I had interned with wasn't actually the team that I ended up joining full-time. I'm not sure if it was like a typical experience or if that's something interns typically do, but I had talked to my manager kind of near the end of the process about how, what I was specifically interested in and what sorts of things I'd like to do kind of at Xbox. And we kind of came to the conclusion together that the team that he was specifically running wasn't exactly aligned with that. So he helped me find other teams within Xbox, and I ended up transferring to the team that I'm currently on right now.
That's pretty amazing. That's a great story. When you went for your internship, do they house you? Is that part of it?
Yeah, they give you the option. I know when I did it, there was some reserved housing on the University of Washington campus that we used. I think it was like the graduate student housing. And so that's where I lived for like 3 months. It was okay.
Right. Well, you're going a long ways for your internship, so it's nice to have at least some assistance finding somewhere to live. Yeah, that would be a challenge that I don't know if I would have been prepared when I was in college to go off and do something like that. I had an internship, but I was here in Austin with the whole thing, and so it's already had a place to live in that kind of situation.
Yeah, for sure. And before this one, I had another internship with a different company in California, and I had to find my own housing for that one. And that was, I've had the experience of trying to find like a new apartment or something local to wherever I live, and that's always a challenge. You have to go through 3 or 4 different places. But trying to find a place to live, halfway across the country is like a whole nother beast.
Yeah.
So that was a nightmare that I was glad to avoid, even if it meant living in, a college dorm essentially.
Was your other internship as fun or useful for you? Did you have a good like it, or was it like, oh, this is not what I want to do?
It was certainly an interesting experience. The first internship I had was in my sophomore year, or the summer after my sophomore year. I interned with Google on their Google Play Music team. And at the time, it was a really exciting experience. It was my first internship. It was my first opportunity to really be in the working force, and also my first opportunity to kind of work in like a big tech company. So there was a lot of really great learning opportunities, and I had a lot of really great mentors there, who went above and beyond to make sure that I had um, like a really productive and like insightful summer. Um, and what ended up happening, it was a really tough choice at the end of the summer about whether I would kind of come back for another internship or look at other places. And what it ultimately came down to was like areas of interest, essentially. The team I had ended up interning with was it was a front end web development team, and like I have some interest in that, but it's definitely not my biggest passion. I have a stronger interest in kind of game development and game development tooling, and so when it came down to picking what to do next, that's kind of what guided me, and so I ended up not returning. But that's a problem that exists, I think, across the wider kind of tech internship space. Is that if you go to the larger companies, a lot of the times the risk that you're running is that you end up on a team that isn't exactly aligned with your interests. I definitely got lucky that second time when I went to Microsoft. I ended up on a team that wasn't totally aligned, but it was still within Xbox, and that gave me a huge like head start springboard to what I wanted to eventually do. I know a lot of people who also interned with me at Microsoft that summer who did not have that same sort of fortune or luck. And so they ended up not returning because they ended up on teams that weren't quite aligned with their interests, and things didn't work out. And so that's just part of the game, right? Is you take these internships both as a learning opportunity for technical experience, but even when it's not what you're technically interested in, just as an opportunity for like professional growth. And so that very first Google internship was a great opportunity for like professional growth, learning how to present technical information to my peers, learning how to interact in a professional like work environment, learning what the real world of like tech looked like and all the tools that people use. And it was also just a great experience to kind of get to live out on my own for 3 months, doing the 9 to 5 work thing every day. So it was an amazing, that first Google internship was an amazing experience. And I guess they've all been amazing experiences, but that one was definitely, it was pivotal in, I think, my career.
Let's go back to, junior high or high school. Did you always know you wanted to be in this industry, or how did you kind of prepare to go into computer science?
I definitely did not. I think at one point in high school, I had the idea that I wanted to make video games. And I think a lot of people kind of find themselves there when they're in high school. So I thought about that, and I was like, oh, well, what's the way to make that happen? And as best I knew, programming was the way to get into that. So my sophomore year of high school, I took my first programming class, and I was pretty good at it. Like it was a first programming class, so there wasn't anything that was really technically interesting or applicable, but it was a really fun class. It was a class I liked going to. But at the end of it, I kind of reached the end of it and thought this was cool, but I don't know if it's particularly what I want to do. It was an elective class. It wasn't something that I felt really strongly about. And so then junior and senior year of high school, I actually spent most of my time preparing for a role as an audio engineer, like a recording engineer, somebody who works with musicians to record their various projects. And that's what I really wanted to do for the last 2-3 years of high school. And that's what I was kind of planning on doing. And when I started looking at schools and different programs I could go to learn this further and kind of become a part of that world, I didn't quite find what I was looking for. But I got to the end of that kind of soul searching experience. And despite really being interested in the audio recording and audio engineering stuff, I'd done a couple of internships kind of in that space before I'd finished high school, going out and recording orchestras and stuff. So I had experience at that point. And kind of with that collective experience of the internships as well as kind of the search for further education and getting into the professional space there, I realized it wasn't really what I wanted to do after high school. So then I was kind of back at square one again of what am I going to do, and this was coupled with the like really terrifying experience of like trying to transition from high school into college and trying to find what major I wanted to do, what school I wanted to go to. I was always a pretty like smart or driven student, but I don't think that I really had a strong direction when it came to picking like colleges or schools or anything like that. So when I lost the direction of I wanted to be an audio engineer, it was, well, now what? And so at the time, I think I started looking at UT because they were a state school, and they had a really good computer science program, and that was just kind of the next thing on my list of things that I liked. And I was like, oh well, I could start with computer science, and if that's not exactly something I love, I can transition to something else. My dad has a kind of an engineering background, and so I spent a lot of time growing up doing a lot of engineering type things, and so I'd already felt like regularly comfortable. Like, I don't know where I'd end up with this kind of a degree, but I think my general personality and stuff kind of fits into an engineering or computer science role well enough. So let's start with majoring in computer science. And I was very fortunate to get into the school and the program. And I think it clicked about at the end of that first semester that, oh yeah, no, I actually like this stuff. I got into school not knowing if I was going to be into this whole computer science thing. And it took about a full semester before I realized it was something I actively wanted to pursue. And so at that point, that's when it kind of all clicked for me, was kind of into that first semester. And then I was full steam ahead.
Were you involved in any extracurricular activities while you were at UT?
Extracurriculars. I listed so many on all those resumes that I sent off to people. I feel like I just remember one of them. I did some stuff with some of the various like computer science organizations that UT hosts. There was the mobile app development one, and at one point I thought I was going to be kind of interested in that space. So I would go to a couple of their meetings to see how things worked. There was an organization, I don't know if they've stopped functioning. I haven't followed up, but there's an organization called EGADS, and that's the game development organization on campus, and I was active with them as well, more so than the mobile app development one. I was also kind of casually involved with the ABCS, which was the Association of Black Computer Scientists back at school. But I don't think I was deeply involved in too many extracurriculars. One of the kind of biggest challenges that I noticed being in school was that there were so many of them that it was hard to really, I found it difficult to focus in on any one of them. So I definitely made the mistake of trying to do too many things at once, not putting all my eggs in one basket.
Do you have any advice for aspiring computer scientists?
I think a lot of people, when they're kind of first getting into the CS program, find out that it's surprisingly difficult. There are a lot of things that are kind of obviously difficult kind of coming into school. You hear about like mechanical engineering, and you hear about like degrees in physics, or some of the really deep biology stuff, and even some of like the humanities have some really intense course loads. But I don't feel like you hear that a lot of the computer science stuff is as difficult as it ends up being. So I think my advice for a lot of those people kind of mirrors something that one of the professors that I had at school, Professor Novak, used to say, which was that like 80% of the work is just showing up to class. And that really, being in the classroom and just putting forth the 80% effort of showing up for a lot of these activities was really pivotal for me. It's challenging because it's the first time in your life, for a lot of people going to school, where they're not as like rigorously guided through a lot of their coursework. They're not told, here's your work that's got to be due at this date, and it's going to follow these parameters, and here's the rubric, here you go off and do your thing. They're just going to grade you on the results that you present them. And so it's important to remember that 80% of getting to those results is just putting in the effort of like that self-initiative of getting into class and keeping on top of your work.
Scott, we really do appreciate your time. I know we said that at the beginning, but we'll say it again now. You had a good perspective for us to share with our students that are interested in computer science, which we're always looking for people to motivate us in them and to inspire. So I think your story is very inspirational. So thank you again. Anything else anybody want to add?
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. I don't think I ever met you while you were at UT. But
I didn't, but I absolutely, when your name popped up in the email address, like asking me about this, I was like, I have seen that so many times and never met this person.
exactly. Small world, yet
Mhm.
big.